certainly aren't pleased at all. For the last 9 years, this government has talked about added investments in our infrastructure, but we continue to see the decline in our secondary roads infrastructure in communities like Sheet Harbour, West Caledonia, Bugler's Cove, and throughout rural Nova Scotia. Will this minister and his department commit to investing a more balanced funding formula so rural communities can get their fair share of infrastructure roads? And we don't need to hear that we didn't support your budget. Thank you.
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't hear the honourable member. I don't know if she said she didn't need to hear that or she didn't want to hear it. But she's going to hear it anyway, Mr. Speaker.
She's going to hear it.
Mr. Speaker, official opposition voted against firefighters. They voted against seniors. They voted against students. They voted against families. Mr. Speaker, all the continuing fishermen. Yeah, fishermen. Don't want to forget the fishermen, Mr. Speaker. They voted against all those people. And you know, Mr. Speaker.
Tax and spend, Murray. Tax and spend.
You know, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
I will.
The Honourable
raising taxes in Nova Scotia, because Mr. Speaker, the critic for the official tax and spend party would raise taxes across the board, give everybody everything they say they will give them, Mr. Speaker. But in the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, they won't give them that. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we hope they never get the opportunity to do that.
The Honourable the member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable the member for Glace Bay has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, as each day goes by, the people of Glace Bay continue to anxiously await word on the future of their new junior high school. A school originally announced 5 years ago, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've asked many times before, Madam Minister, are you still committed to the construction of a new junior high school in Glace Bay?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as people in the House, folks in the House have heard me say before, we have a 2003 capital construction list that we are addressing. On that list, there is a new junior high school for Glace Bay. And as I've said before, and as I will say again, this government is committed to honouring everything on that particular capital construction list. That includes Glace Bay Junior High School.
The Honourable the member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the two junior high schools in Glace Bay were built in the 1940s. The students in Glace Bay deserve better, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the people of Glace Bay have been understanding and patient on this issue. So my question for the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is, Madam Minister, how much longer are the people of Glace Bay going to have to wait?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do want to agree with the member opposite that the students in Glace Bay deserve a new school. That's why this government is committed to building them a new school. In fact, it is a $15 million plus new school for the students in Glace Bay.
Wow. The Honourable the member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, then my final question for the Minister, Mr. Speaker, and I'll make it as clear and concise as I possibly can, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister commit here today to complete construction by the end of the school year next year, or by the end of next year, and will the Minister name where that school is going to be located? Madam Minister, go ahead, answer those and make my day.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker,
Order,
Mr. Speaker,
please.
And I do believe, Mr. Speaker, that it would be welcome news to all members of this House if we could conclude the questioning with respect to Glace Bay Junior High. And I will conclude by saying this government is committed to that project. It is a $15 million project. And, Mr. Speaker, It will.
Order, please. The minister has the floor.
We have a process to go through. The member opposite is aware of the assessment process, and I'm pleased to say that the assessment for sites has been completed. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, to answer his question, the assessment has been completed and the Wallace Road site has been selected.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable the member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be hoping for just as good an answer to my question. So my question to you is to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. One of the worst sections of secondary road in this province is the section of Highway 256 from the West Branch corner to the Colchester County line in western Pictou County. This approximate 5-kilometre section is very badly potholed, cracked, and is exhibiting overall deterioration. Now, I brought this to the attention of the Minister, Mr. Speaker, on numerous occasions, and I know residents are losing patience. So my question through you, can the Minister tell this House when Highway 256 will be repaired?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm being encouraged by my colleagues to refer that question to the member for Queens, but I won't do that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll certainly take that under advisement and report back to the member. I don't have the information with me, but I will certainly give the information for the honourable member.
Good. The Honourable the member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Economic development and tourism opportunities depend on good infrastructure. Now, the West Branch and Area Community Association, they've worked long and hard over the past few years to bring improvements to their community. Their Infrastructure Improvement Committee have brought media and government attention to local roads and bridges. In fact, Highway 256 was recently featured on the CBC Nova Scotia Suppertime News, and it was shown on the CBC National News across the country. So obviously, Mr. Speaker, the problem has been recognized. So I want to ask, when is the department going to recognize this serious concern?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. And certainly that road the honourable member is talking about here today certainly is an important highway, an important road in that constituency. It's important to the people. Like many other roads in this province, Mr. Speaker, we're dealing with the issues of priorities, trying to balance the dollars we have for capital. And Mr. Speaker, I'd love to be able to stand in this House, as I've said on many occasions, and say we're going to pave them all. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, we know that's not possible, but I can assure the honourable member that will be taken into consideration as we do our capital funding.
The Honourable the member for Pictou West on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to table a letter written to myself from the West Branch and Area Community Association, in which the chairman states that this road, quote, currently cannot be traveled at posted speed limits without the risk of loss of control of the vehicle, unquote. So not just economic development, but now safety for drivers and the timeliness of emergency response are issues. So my question, Mr. Speaker, how soon can the West Branch residents expect action on their concerns?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just restate what I said a moment ago, that we'll certainly take it under consideration, but I will commit the honourable member that I will respond to the individual. If he wants to provide a copy of that letter, I will respond personally to that individual on behalf of his behalf.
The Honourable the member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. Last week, Newfoundland Premier Danny Williams announced a $73,000 annual pay increase for pathologists. That took the base salary from being the worst in Canada to bringing it on par with Nova Scotia, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. When you include an extra $60,000 stipend, retention bonus, on-call fees, and other benefits, the total compensation package is worth over $360,000 a year for those pathologists in Newfoundland. That's about $100,000 more than Nova Scotian pathologists make here in our province, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, what is the government doing to ensure the pathologists will stay and work here in Nova Scotia where we need them, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as Member Robinson knows, that the pathologists in this province, especially the ones here in Capital Health, work under their own APP or different payment plan within their group. Mr. Speaker, that will be impacted this week, I believe, when the master agreement is ratified with Doctors Nova Scotia. So there should be an increase for those doctors in the next number of weeks.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pathologists everywhere, including in Nova Scotia, are overworked and in some cases underpaid, Mr. Speaker. Pathologists recently resigned in Sydney, another in Amherst has retired, another in New Glasgow left for the States, and 5 vacancies are currently shown in Capital District, Mr. Speaker. This is so important that the government recognize that they ensure that these individuals are working here in Nova Scotia. Pathologists have been working for 2 years without a contract, and there doesn't seem to be any light in sight, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, when can he give a specific date? Will these pathologists see an increase in their pay, and would he make it retroactive like they did in Newfoundland, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I mentioned in my first answer, of course, these individuals work under an APP because they also work with Capital Health in order to have this thing. They've been negotiating quite in earnest over this one. Mr. Speaker, we would want them to have an appropriate pay for the work that they do. Mr. Speaker, it is like any other physician in this province is to make sure that we have a pay that is comparable across this province. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to look at that and, of course, bring it to Cabinet as it bring it to our caucus table to make sure that they have a plan that makes sense for all Nova Scotians to make sure pathology is protected in this province.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral question period has expired. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Government House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Not just yet, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm rising on a point of order. During question period today, the Premier, in responding to the Leader of the Official Opposition, said that the member misled this House, Mr. Speaker. I believe that language is unparliamentary, and I wish that he would apologize and withdraw, Mr. Speaker.
I will take that under advisement. The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services on an introduction.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise today and introduce a man who is no stranger to this legislature. It's quite bizarre, Mr. Speaker, that our roles would be reversed, for it used to be years ago when I sat in the gallery, Mr. Speaker, and watched down as he answered questions in question period. And I certainly hope he doesn't give me a dressing down later on for my heckling during question period, Mr. Speaker, because I learned from him. So I would ask all members of the House to give a warm welcome to a former MLA from this House, my father, Ken Stretch.
Certainly we welcome him and all visitors to our gallery here today. The Honourable, the Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Thank you. Would you please call Bill number 126, the Fair Access to Regulated Professions Act?
Bill 126. The Honourable, the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise and speak about this act, the Fair Access to Regulated Professions legislation. We're working hard in our province to ensure that we have fair, transparent and accountable processes in place to make it easier and more attractive for externally trained professionals, both within other provinces in Canada and also globally, to live and to work in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, we're aware in a superficial way, but not in any sort of, I think, profound emotional way, of the demographic challenge that is facing this province. But when you look at the facts and the figures, when you look at the studies that have been in place, Mr. Speaker, that have been presented to government, that I assume I know members of this House have had access to briefings on this, and I assume members from the opposition have also had access to this information, that one becomes very, very worried about the ability for the province to continue its strong economic growth unless we're able to build our trained workforce properly. And one way of doing that, Mr. Speaker, is through attracting workers back from other provinces or through attracting immigrants from other countries. Mr. Speaker, the problem, of course, becomes a problem of credentialing. And while this bill leaves the credentialing, as well it should, in the hands of regulated professions where the standards are set, nonetheless, the importance to have transparent and timely responses to those individuals and information to those individuals from other provinces or from other countries who may be thinking of moving to Nova Scotia is a problem that this government wants to take some leadership on and has taken leadership on, Mr. Speaker, through this very, very important bill. The demographic challenge, as I said, Mr. Speaker, that I've seen show that we have a typical inverted pyramid, typical of Western countries, typical of North America, with an exception of the United States, which through rather substantial immigration has had a slightly different profile. But the Canadian profile is an inverted pyramid in keeping with the Western countries, where we have more and more people in my age group and older, and fewer people who are younger who are able to take these jobs and sustain the economy in its advance towards the future. So, Mr. Speaker, we are going to have to do a myriad of different things in order to make sure that we have adequate supply of workers in our various industries. And it struck me, Mr. Speaker, this came home to me when I was visiting on a labour tour, and I did a labour tour of the province, really looking at occupational health and safety issues and featuring those companies that had improved their occupational health and safety record. But I came across a company in Mahone Bay, Mr. Speaker, who, although they're quite happy to talk to me about their occupational health and safety issues, also wanted to speak to me about the lack of skilled workers, Mr. Speaker. They had $35 million in back orders, and they weren't bidding on any more back orders because, Mr. Speaker, they just weren't able to deliver on the back orders they had because they needed 60 more employees. So I asked them what they were asking for in terms of qualifications. They told me all they wanted was high school and a willingness to come to work every day, and the starting salary was $12 an hour. Well, Mr. Speaker, if they don't bid on contracts in other provinces, then what will happen, Mr. Speaker, is that when they go back to bidding, their name, their brand will have to be revived, and they'll have to work very, very hard to get new orders in. But, Mr. Speaker, they have no choice. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. And it struck me very, very strongly, Mr. Speaker, that the demographic challenge that we have is one of the greatest challenges that this province will face. In fact, in a study done by Dow professor McNiven, he claims that the challenge, the public policy challenge, the challenge politically for all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, is this demographic challenge. And that there are very few tools that the government has at disposal in order to meet the demographic challenge. We can help, as we are doing, working through the Department of Labour and Workforce Development with underrepresented communities in the workforce, particularly doing special projects, Mr. Speaker, with the Mi'kmaq communities and with the Black Nova Scotia communities who have been traditionally underrepresented in terms of their percentages in the workforce for various reasons, not of their own doing, Mr. Speaker. And so there are targeted programs that my department, my my new department has to try and work with these communities. We're working also with disabled Nova Scotians who for too many years have been frozen out of the workplace because proper procedures, policies, and accommodations were not put in for them, Mr. Speaker, and so we're working to increase the participation of groups that were typically underrepresented, Mr. Speaker. That's one tool that we have. The other tool that we have, Mr. Speaker, is one that takes place through the Workers' Compensation Board, and that is working with injured workers in order to prevent injuries in the first place, Mr. Speaker, and with injured workers, once they're injured, to help them return to work faster. Mr. Speaker, it's very interesting to me that the chair of the Workers' Compensation Board spoke to me recently and gave a presentation in which he noted that we'd been successful last year in returning workers to work faster, and Mr. Speaker, that this meant, Mr. Speaker, that about 420 additional workers, this would be the equivalent of 420 additional workers coming back to the workforce, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
we've checked the record, and apparently it should actually be the honourable member from Halifax Needham. We have that had adjourned debate, and there seems to have been a slight mix-up. So, sure. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, the minister has already spoken in second debate to this bill, and so it's out of order, this procedure that we're using here now with the minister speaking again to this bill, and that's my point, and that's my only point.
Thank you. So, the honourable member from Halifax Needham was the one that adjourned debate, and we should have returned to her. So, if the member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would move that we adjourn debate on this bill.
The question before the host is to adjourn debate on bill number 126. Is the host ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? We need there have been several requests for a recorded vote. How much time do we need? Would we ring the bells, please? (2:22), ring the bells. Order, please. Are the whips satisfied? They're satisfied. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I apologize for any confusion that has resulted with regards to the order paper. There was an error with regards to the calling of the bill. As we were going forward, the orders of the day, the papers for the day indicated that indeed it had not been adjourned and it was just a process to move forward. It was intent and sincerely for the minister to get up and to speak, but indeed the honourable member for Halifax Needham technically did, well not technically, she did adjourn the debate with regards to bill number 126. So with that, under point of order, indeed, of course, we agree that that is correct. It was an oversight with regards to the order paper. It was not intended to go around the procedures of the House, and I would then ask for the concurrence to adjourn the debate on Bill 126 and proceed with public bills for second reading for other bills. My apologies.
The question before the House is to adjourn debate on 126. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. And thank you for the clarification. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Speaker, call public bills for second reading.
Public bills for second reading.
Thank you. Would you please call bill number 179, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter?
Bill 179, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. The Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Well, thank you, Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise at this time to speak on Bill 179, which is the Halifax Charter Act. And to get comfortable, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to speak for some time. Mr. Speaker, this act has sort of been a long time in coming, and it's been certainly basically since the time which I've been in government, which is about 9 years, that I'm getting some encouragement from the opposite side of the House, Mr. Speaker. It has come up from time to time, and I know the other folks who occupied this particular portfolio have raised it from time to time within caucus. Yeah, I am going to adjourn debate. What do you want me to do again? Mr. Speaker, after considerable reflection, government felt that it would be a most appropriate time to bring forward a Halifax Charter in light of the tremendous growth that the Halifax Regional Municipality has undergone in the past number of years, and also its role as the capital of Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think before getting into this, because I want to clarify something for the members of the House and hopefully the members of the media if they are listening. One of the provisions in this particular charter talks about the creation of district councils. There has been, my executive assistant was a recent candidate in the municipal council by-election out in Bedford, and it's been suggested that he had some input into the insertion of this clause into the charter. I want to assure the members of the House this is categorically not the case. He and I have never discussed this, and matter of fact, some of the things that were attributed to positions that he held as appeared in Saturday morning's Herald were not accurate information. And it is unfortunate when a person puts their name on the line to run for public office that they are given by implication or directly some very unfounded abuse. Mr. Speaker, the young man in question, Matthew Christie, is a man of integrity, and he is doing a good job in his role. And I can tell you that as a minister of the Crown, I have a standard of integrity which I am supposed to meet, which involves preventing conflict of interest. And, Mr. Speaker, there was no conflict of interest, and that should be the end of the story. Oh, no, they won't leave it alone. I know that. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, the Halifax Charter was introduced in response to petitions from HRM. Mayor Kelly and his colleagues all felt that a charter. Now, I know that there are a number of people in this legislature who did serve on the HRM Council. As a matter of fact, I expect that their service on the HRM Council was probably the stepping stone to getting into this particular House of Assembly. And therefore, the arguments pro and con a charter for the Halifax municipality would be in detail better known to many of them than to me as a person who did not sit on that council. However, Mr. Speaker, the fact that the HRM Council and the administration felt that this was going to be a charter would be a way to make HRM better serve the needs of its citizens and to give it a better place in the whole province of Nova Scotia, caused this government to reflect upon those arguments and to decide that this is probably the appropriate time to move this legislation forward. I want to emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that this legislation, despite the fact that it was introduced by this government, is a direct result of a request from HRM. It's a direct response to HRM, as indeed were a number of the changes in the Municipal Government Act which the members on the opposite side of the House didn't think were appropriate, despite the fact that a number of those members, when they sat on municipal council, thought they were the right thing to do. So I guess where you stand on particular issues quite often depends on where you sit. Absolutely. Where you sit. Anyway, I don't think anyone, Mr. Speaker, can argue about the importance of Halifax in Nova Scotia because it is the capital city. And indeed, it is not only the capital city in Nova Scotia, probably for most intents and purposes, except if you ask the people in the other 3 Atlantic provinces, we would find that it is the capital of Atlantic Canada. And I see the people on the opposite side of the House nodding their heads. Halifax is the largest city. It has the largest, certainly the largest economy, notwithstanding St. John's and its wonderful opportunities it has for the offshore now. But Halifax is the largest capital in Atlantic Canada. It is the medical center for Atlantic Canada in terms of high-tech medical treatment. You know, in Newfoundland, in Newfoundland and Labrador, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, they have a very good med school at Memorial University. They also have some extremely talented medical people over there. But the fact is that most of the really high-end surgery that is done in Atlantic Canada is done here in Halifax. Similarly, there is the Janeway Children's Hospital in St. John's, and which is a marvelous institution. And I can say, actually, when I lived in Newfoundland, had the opportunity, perhaps unfortunately, to visit the Janeway on a couple of occasions with one of our children, a marvelous institution as well. But indeed, the IWK Hospital here in Halifax is really the tertiary center for children's health here in Atlantic Canada. And this is recognized. I mean, this is not something that you go around and you debate. This is a fact that is readily supported by people in other things. And that's probably a good thing, Mr. Speaker, because collectively in Atlantic Canada, we don't have many more than 2 million folks. And to try and duplicate everything in every province probably isn't a good thing. As a matter of fact, those who would look at Atlantic Canada objectively would say maybe we have too many of most things, simply because they occur in each provincial jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, that may or may not be the case, depending on where you stand, but in a lot of cases, for example, if we take the Atlantic provinces, in Halifax, or I'm sorry, in Nova Scotia, we have 11 degree-granting universities. We used to have 13. In Newfoundland, they have 1. In Prince Edward Island, they have 1. In New Brunswick, they must have 4. So in Atlantic Canada, for a population of 2 million people, we have about 16 or 17 degree-granting institutions, which is a lot. Now, I want to say it's a lot, Mr. Speaker, but in Nova Scotia, of course, it is a great strength of this province. A great strength of this province, these marvelous education institutions we have. And Halifax as a center of higher education is envied right across this country. We have, we have St. Mary's University and Dalhousie University, and we have Mount St. Vincent University. We have the Atlantic School of Theology. We have the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. In HRM, we have 5 degree-granting institutions. All fine institutions, Mr. Speaker. All fine institutions. And the number of students, the number of people from Nova Scotia and other parts of Atlantic Canada, other parts of Canada, and other parts of the world that come into this province and make remarkable contributions because of the high quality of university education that is available here enriches our province tremendously. But I mention that, Mr. Speaker, because when we're looking at Halifax as perhaps a unique constituency and why there should be a charter, we have to understand what HRM consists of. Now, HRM has operated within the Municipal Government Act, but the fact is that just over 40% of the population of Nova Scotia resides in HRM, and when we look across Canada, we find that cities, major cities in many other jurisdictions have their own charters, Winnipeg and Vancouver and Edmonton and places like that. And one of the keys to the maintenance of a sort of a capital city and a capital region was the ability to perhaps more closely control some of the decisions, because when you get that magnitude of size and the number of people, that some of the things that may be appropriate for the rest of the province, which are covered in HRM, maybe can be better government can be provided to the people and for the people of the province if there is a charter where some of the decisions that are made can be unique or designed to meet the large capital population. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I said, nobody in Nova Scotia would deny the importance of HRM and as a capital region here, having about 40% of our population. And of course, this is is expected to grow. Unfortunately, and I guess perhaps it is unfortunately, if you come from other areas of the province, that people continue to move to HRM because that's where many of the jobs are. Mr. Speaker, the HRM has a long and distinguished history. The city of Halifax was founded in 1749.
By who?
By whom? By Lord Halifax. Absolutely. And I'm looking at the member from Halifax Chebucto to get his head nodding, because he may have been the person in the legislature around in 1749. But
He was there then.
anyway, Mr. Speaker, and Halifax has been a unique country. Matter of fact, the history of Halifax is, you know, it's really kind of fabulous. You know, this was the birthplace of democracy in Canada. Indeed, this year, in this House, we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of democracy. And Mr. Speaker, we may have 97 more politicians and one less in the constituency of Glace Bay. I don't know, but anyway, now that the Minister of Education was kind enough earlier today to confirm the site for a school on the Wallace Road site. Now, Mr. Speaker, you know, some of the, you know, the fact, you know, coming from Glace Bay, but now the resolution, one of the resolutions I tabled today was about a gentleman from Glace Bay, a very distinguished person, and the honourable member from Glace Bay may wish to look at Hansard to read about the Reverend David McNaughton and some of the contributions that he has made to the United Church and other organizations in here. So, you know, Glace Bay, despite the fact that it is not in Halifax, and they have a... Mr. Speaker, the member from Glace Bay took me down a bad road. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I want to get back to the Halifax Charter, Mr. Speaker. This indeed is, you know, really a very serious topic, and I know that there are a number of people that probably wish to speak on it and to support this piece of legislation and everything that's in it. Mr. Speaker, that is correct, is it? Yeah. Mr. Speaker, as I said, this legislation has been the product of rather lengthy and protracted discussions with HRM officials, as well as advice between their elected, you know, the sharing of ideas between some of their elected officials as well as some of their corporate officials to try and come up with a piece of legislation that is going to meet the needs of HRM and also is going to fit well into the other, you know, the other part of Nova Scotia, fit well with Nova Scotia. Now, yeah, and that's one of the things that sometimes people forget, you know, particularly in the opposite side of the House, that there are rural parts to the HRM municipality. And so when this charter is being designed, one of the things that you have to take in consideration is that HRM is a, you know, a very complex constituency, and therefore would actually, having a specific piece of, no, we're not forgetting about CBRM, because I understand, you know, CBRM, a very, again, historic and very fine amalgamated constituency here. Same rural aspects it did, only one of the things, of course, they had sort of, their resource-based industries were a little, you know, what we call more mineral-based than they are, at least in the most here, although we did have a very rich mining tradition in HRM, and indeed we have a mine out there, Gaze River, I believe, right now, and I saw a picture of that the other day, and we had Moose and Carroll's Corner, natural gypsum, so it is a very thing, Mr. Speaker. Anyway, the thing with the economic growth of Halifax, it right now is the gateway into the gateway into Nova Scotia, and indeed probably in some ways the gateway, you know, into central Canada, and then going from central Canada down into the Midwestern United States. And the gateway strategy, which was referenced in question period and a couple times today that the Minister of Economic Development spoke about, and as well as the Premier, Mr. Speaker, this charter, once it is implemented, will probably make it better for all of Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada by facilitating this gateway concept that everybody thinks is important for our province's future. So, Mr. Speaker, The charter is not only for sort of the nuts and bolts of making HRM work better administratively. It's also visionary and looking to the future and putting in place a structure where, I'm going to use the word better or more appropriate, and even more timely decisions can be made. Right now, Mr. Speaker, as you would be well aware, under the MGA, there are a number of decisions that municipalities wish to make that have to be approved by government, usually by the Department of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. Well, the fact is that sometimes there is a time lag. The ability to respond immediately is not always there. Once we get the request, the due diligence perhaps has been done by the municipalities, but if we are signing off on it, of course, we have to assure ourselves that the due diligence that has been done is appropriate and it meets not only the needs of HRM, but it fits well into the pattern of municipal government in the province. So, Mr. Speaker, the other part of the gateway, Mr. Speaker, that we don't talk a whole lot about is in the constituency of Colchester-Musqueam Valley is the Robert L. Stanfield Airport, which, by the way, I think is something that we can be very, very proud of because it, for the second year in a row, won an international award as the best airport in its category. So, 4 million visitors a year come into Nova Scotia through the airport, the Robert L. Stanfield Airport. And of course, Mr. Speaker, one of the things I suppose should be speaking of, I'm talking about Halifax as a capital city and also the seat of the government here, the provincial government here in Nova Scotia, is the person that the airport is named for now, the Honourable Robert L. Stanfield, who was a premier in this province for a long time, was recognized. He was actually, Mr. Speaker, this province's first education minister. First education minister this province actually had, and he held the portfolio of education minister. Now, what we were going to do with that, Mr. Speaker, was we were actually going to pick up the school in Dominion and move it to Day Spain. We can put it on the Wallace Road School. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, but Mr. Stanfield and his contribution not only to the evolution of the development of Nova Scotia and his input into national politics is really, the tremendous positive contribution that he made is not challenged by anybody. It is recommended. It is. Yeah. And thank you. And actually, the member from, although he was never really active in the family business, of course, the Stanfield family has been one of the well-known Nova Scotia entrepreneurial families since the 1800s. And by the way, the first mill for Stanfields was over in Prince Edward Island, and they eventually moved it over to Truro, where it remains these days. And of course, Stanfields is just really a remarkable. It's a remarkable business because, to my knowledge, Stanfields hasn't had any government assistance to keep going. They still are a textile manufacturer here in Nova Scotia in the face of so many of these other factories became sales agency, and the goods were manufactured offshore. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tie that back in here because, as we know, it was Mr. Stanfield, his family name, and of course, one of the people who made a tremendous contribution, and one of the Stanfields that made a tremendous contribution to this province in recent years, as the Speaker would know, and as the members of the opposite side of the House would know, was Tom Stanfield. He's the current president of the company, but he was the chair, the founding chair of Nova Scotia Business Inc. And, you know, it was not easy to find somebody to take that role, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Stanfield stepped up and did a remarkable job. And the numbers of jobs that Nova Scotia Business Inc. has brought not only to HRM but to other parts of the province is something of which I think we can all be very proud. This was an agency that was created some number of years ago. We had a large number of, we had business people from all over this province come together and try and decide what are some things that we can do to enhance the future of Nova Scotia. Now, you know, the NSBI, for the most part, its head office is here in Halifax. It's in the World Trade and Convention Center. And, you know, they had most of their board meetings. But I believe that Nova Scotia Business Inc., along with the Nova Scotia Department of Economic Development, have, you know, it's really in the thousands of jobs that have been created in the past 8 or 9 years. And many of those jobs, Mr. Speaker, have been here in the metro area. Now, one of the things that HRM is trying to do and the government is trying to do, our Premier has spoken of it on a number of occasions, is to try and perhaps turn HRM into one of the major financial capitals here in the country. But, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that has discouraged some people for coming into HRM to set up businesses, ones that would benefit all Nova Scotia, which is directly referred to this act and some accompanying piece of legislation, is we need better office space downtown. We've got to have the opportunity so that developers can put facilities so those businesses can come here. So one of the things that was in this, despite the opposition of people like the member from Halifax, Shabuktu, who does not like new structures, likes only old buildings, but Mr. Speaker, some of the things that were in the Halifax Charter and the accompanying legislation would follow it. We're going to make it easier for developers to remove some of the red tape that would enable developers to make it more friendly for development, so perhaps we can grow and bring this Class A-class office space that we need downtown a little bit easier. It's, I've been told that sometimes it's very frustrating to people who want to do development in HRM. Some of the restrictions that are there for a variety of reasons. You know, the bringing in the charter and some of the additional amendments to the MGA and, of course, the Halifax Style design, which is a piece of this as well, is that, Mr. Speaker, it would enable, HRM to grow economically, and of course, we have to get things that will keep our young people here. And one of the unfortunate things, and Halifax is no different than other parts, although the population of Halifax is growing, it's not growing naturally. The population of Halifax is growing because people are moving here. And, Mr. Speaker, people are moving here, and if they move to Halifax, if they're moving into Halifax, means that they're mobile and they might move someplace else. So one of the things that we would like to do, and which we think this charter may help HRM to do, is to put in conditions that would enable HRM to be more attractive to more of the young people that are going elsewhere for employment. For example, I know, and I look at the member from Cape Breton Centre and the member from Glace Bay, and there is a large number of young people who are on a plane and they're making a living in various parts of Alberta, and they come back here, and there's lots of money. They tell me that the Cape Breton economy right now is being fueled by Alberta money, a lot of it. But it would be good that if these people could not work in their home community up in the Cape Breton area, that if they could work in Nova Scotia, it's not quite as far to travel. So, Mr. Speaker, putting conditions that will enable development and business growth in HRM is a good thing, not only for HRM, but for the rest of the province. Mr. Speaker, I was reminded by my colleague, the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture, that we're talking about the diversity of HRM, is that we have a major fishery here. You know, and I mean, even down in Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, I think there are wharves down there, and there are fishermen, because I know when I was over knocking on doors during the by-election, which the honourable member won, I saw a lot of people, a lot of fishing gear and whatnot, and I can't understand why she voted against the support for the fishery. You know, particularly as part of HRM, you know, her conscience as a, you know, as representing representing HRM, I would have thought her conscience would have prevented her from doing that. She would have stood up for her constituents. I really did, yeah. Fishermen and farmers. Feed us all. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I don't know. I just, Mr. Speaker, and you know, and with, to be quite frank, you know, the member from Halifax Citadel who talks about being the university champion, and this particular piece of legislation is going to make it easier to attract more students for the growth of universities and all these things. Well, he voted against universities and that. I expect to vote against the charter too. You know, I'm guessing just to be consistent. Well, look, I tell you, I think I heard you vote against a lot of good things. No, we don't. Oh, really? Okay, yeah. Mr. Speaker, in many ways, I've tried to link that Halifax, you know, not only is the capital city, it's the education capital, it's the medical capital, and it is the political capital, and as we all recognized, it is the economic, also the economic capital of this province. And the health and performance of the other municipalities are, quite frank, you know, are in many ways dependent, are dependent on Mr. Speaker, on the economy of Halifax. Now, we do have an equalization system here in Nova Scotia. There is, I do believe the mayor of the CBRM does recognize that there is an equalization system here. It appears that he doesn't quite agree with it. So probably at this point might be a disagreement between two members, but yeah, the members of CBRM and the members of the Department of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. But anyway, the fact that it is the economic engine of the province, and as they say, the health and economic performance in many ways is related, other municipalities are related to how well Halifax goes. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that, you know, one time when I worked in Halifax, some time ago, and lived here, and well, I guess I didn't live here, I had to pay a poll tax. I had to pay a poll tax in Halifax. Now, I know the member from Dartmouth South Portland Valley on that side of the house may be the only one that really has been around long enough to remember a poll tax. Do you remember the poll tax? Yeah, I can remember that. Yeah, I had to pay these poll taxes. If you worked in the city, you would remember. No, okay. Yeah, no, I remember. Now, the reason I say that is we were in the coffee room the other day. I was no reflection, but she said that she was the same age as the member from Cape Breton South and the member from Antigonish. So I figured that was... Anyway, Mr. Speaker, HRM, of course, over the course of time and the improved things is that the poll tax is gone. And what that was, Mr. Speaker, you wouldn't know that. If you worked in HRM and you did not pay municipal taxes here, then there was basically a payroll tax where you know, everybody. I think in the case it might have been about $50 a year. It may have been or something like that. It was if you weren't a property owner, and worked here, then you had to pay that. So. Now, Mr. Speaker, a major city having its own charter is certainly not uncommon in Canada, and I said that earlier, but I want to repeat it, because I like to think that in terms of the importance of HRM as a community in Nova Scotia, it would rank up there with the importance of Vancouver and British Columbia, where they are going to have, they're going to have the Olympics. They're going to have the Olympics. I think in terms of like Toronto. Now, Toronto is a little bit different. They've got a city charter there. But as I understand is that Toronto has boroughs, which perhaps makes it operate a little bit differently than here.
How about the Leafs? Maybe? How about those Leafs?
No, they haven't won a Stanley Cup since before the Premier was born. Yeah. Is that right? Okay. And Winnipeg. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm one of the few people maybe in here that has watched Winnipeg develop over the course of the years, notwithstanding the member from Halifax Fairview, but he's got a little few years and hours ago. He didn't see the part of Winnipeg that I saw. Anyway, one of the things, Winnipeg hit a critical mass. How many people in here have been to Winnipeg lately? And it's a marvelous city now. It's really, the landscape has changed. It's got arts and culture and all of these things which were there very minimally when I was in and out of there, and when I one time had a career as I worked as a hard rock miner for a couple of years, and I used to go in and out of Winnipeg and going to these things. So the city has changed, but when you have cities like Toronto and Vancouver and Winnipeg having their own charters, I think if that is one of the things that would make one of those cities greater, then we're trying to make HRM greater. To have the same place, then obviously if a city charter facilitates that, or an HRM charter, then they're very well could be here. And the government is well advised to support HRM in this regard, and that's what we're doing. Now, what these cities have, Vancouver, Toronto, and Winnipeg, have in common is that they are all regional centers with a strong economic base. So if, having a charter is good can strengthen the economic base of your municipality, then it makes sense that Halifax, our province's largest city, with the largest economic and being the provincial capital, that we too would have a charter here to enable HRM, excuse me, HRM to move forward as it should. Mr. Speaker, charter legislation that is being proposed is based on the Municipal Government Act, and to be quite frank, I think there are a number of people in here that recognize that, and kind of the tweaking has been done is to dearly respond to Halifax as the economic and the political capital of the province. And the MGA, of course, is a legislation under which all municipalities currently operate. Now, members will know that under the current MGA, HRM has its own special section. So it's a special section that recognizes special HRM needs, something that no other municipality has. However, it is the feeling of HRM and agreed to by government that the needs of HRM have evolved to the point that having the special section relating to HRM in the MGA is no longer the best governance approach. The best approach now is to remove the HRM governance from the MGA and to set up new legislation, effectively a charter for HRM. Now, what the charter will do, Mr. Speaker, is it will allow government to be more flexible and more responsive to HRM's evolving needs, especially around growth, development, and economic opportunities, without continually having to amend the Municipal Government Act. And I guess one only has to take a look at this sitting of the House to find out what happens when you try to make some minor changes to the Municipal Government Act to get the full perspective of people, particularly the people in HRM. And of course, if you're talking about dogs, then you're getting them from Atlanta, Georgia, and Toronto, and every other place. So whereas HRM Council went to the cats and had a little dust up there, Mr. Speaker, we felt that the legislation we had proposed in the Municipal Government Act, which would amend the powers of municipality to control or to regulate dogs, was a good thing. However, unfortunately, it appeared to be perhaps deliberately, widely misunderstood what that particular clause was intended to do, Mr. Speaker, and of course it would have applied here in the Charter, and it was a request from UNSM, was right now municipalities have the right to ban dogs. They can do it. What this particular amendment that did not get through the Law Amendments Committee would have done was would have given municipalities other options to banning, which probably might have been more appropriate in the cases where there were dogs whose behavior was not in the best interests of the public and in particular public safety. So, Mr. Speaker, the Charter is going to allow government to be more flexible and responsive to HRM's evolving needs, especially the growth, development, and economic opportunities. As they say, these things, and I'm repeating them because they're important, and without continually having to amend the Municipal Government Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that, if you look around HRM where they've got probably some unique problems, we've got them. All we've got to do is walk outside the door down here and see the traffic that comes into downtown Halifax, and question is how to best deal with that. Although they deal with it as best they can, it's when you are trying to compare, to preserve a heritage district and trying to make a transportation system work within that, it's not always that easy, and maybe the transportation route should be someplace else. These are questions which maybe can be best considered outside the Municipal Government Act, and inside a Halifax Charter. Now, the Charter, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, the proposal of this Act is to take the powers relating to municipalities in general and HRM in particular that are in the current Municipal Government Act and places them into a separate new act. Mr. Speaker, what really are the major changes? Well, Mr. Speaker, the Charter not only reflects its own legislation that we have proposed, but it, of course, incorporated the proposed amendments to the Municipal Government Act. So the fact is, the intent of this Charter is that when we make changes in the Municipal Government Act that are then we would be making changes where appropriate to the HRM Charter. And in this case, I can say with the tabling of the Charter this time, Mr. Speaker, is that we brought forth changes to the Municipal Government Act and they were discussed in the law amendments process. And the intent, of course, Mr. Speaker, was that any changes that were made to the Municipal Government Act as a result of the law amendment, the law amendments process would be included in the Halifax Charter Act. So effectively, it's, I guess, in some ways that we did recognize that it might have been the case where this act was tabled and it was going to have to be amended before it was passed, simply because there had been changes in the Municipal Government Act. So we did recognize that. Now, people will say, why did you then introduce the Municipal Government Act when you did, as opposed to waiting to see what was going to happen, the Halifax Charter Act when you did, as opposed to waiting to see when the Municipal Government Act, what was going to happen as a result of the changes of that. Well, to be quite frank, Mr. Speaker, although we would very much like to see this bill be passed during this session of the legislature, it seemed unlikely that it was going to be. It's a document which is going to require considerable careful study by a good many people. The UNSM, people in HRM will go back, I'm sure, and they'll have a sober second thought about some of the things that are in the Charter. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to bring a document to the floor of this legislature so that there would be something concrete. And we're having this discussion about the Charter. We think the legislation was introduced as good legislation, but we want to give people the opportunity to examine and, where necessary, debate, so that when the Charter comes back on the floor in the fall, there will be more informed discussion. There'll be opportunity for more informed discussion than there would be if we moved this forward with this very careful. I think, Mr. Speaker, we have seen some unfortunate examples in this sitting of the legislature where there have been some things that have happened, particularly with regard to amendments, because people have acted on information which probably is not the most accurate. And as a result, there were some very good things that were introduced into legislation that will not be approved this sitting. Now, among other things that the Charter legislation will do, and it's, the type of thing that just makes it easier to do business. Mr. Speaker, if HRM wants to sign a lease for 5 years, that might be more than $100,000. They have to come to the Department of Service, Nova Scotia, and Municipal Relations to get the approval to do that. And anybody who knows about the price of office space and floors of offices, in buildings in downtown Halifax, I'm sure probably would say that, you're getting into a long-term commitment for a lease that maybe $100,000, long-term commitment for rent is probably, the question is, why should they have to come to the Department of Service, Nova Scotia, and Municipal Relations to get permission to do that? Well, that's a pretty good question. So one of the things that this legislation does is that it changes the requirement for ministerial approval for long-term commitments from $100,000 to $500,000. And Mr. Speaker, this is probably a good thing. I mean, this is one of these little practical things that kind of makes sense. I don't think anybody in here is going to disagree with that. If you know about the price of real estate and other commitments, they may have some contractual commitments. For example, in my department, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I found out this morning is that our software contracts in the department administered under this Department of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, we're now up to $1 million. That's our software contracts. We had a discussion with the deputy this morning, so I can see that within HRM, which basically has so much infrastructure to maintain and whatnot, that whether it's a lease of equipment or it's a lease of technology equipment for computer for information services that, you know, having a commitment of more than $100,000 over a period of time is not hard to do. Now, one of the other things, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, that was included in this act was the authority for HRM to establish district councils, which would provide local residents with an added voice into local matters. Mr. Speaker, I think the fact of the matter is that everybody knows that despite the fact that there are certain parts and certain elements of HRM that work very, very well, and nobody would trying to get away from them, there are certain areas of HRM where there is tension. And Mr. Speaker, the insertion of this particular clause, of this particular amendment, was to try and provide a compromise. Certainly, everybody knows that one of the groups of residents, they wanted basically taxation powers, and they wanted the ability to spend their money the money that was collected for them, more or less, in general, spend it as they saw fit. Well, that's unfortunately, or fortunately, that's not the way things work, whether it's an HRM or works in the province. But what we thought might be an appropriate intermediate step, which might give people a greater sense of ownership, was if they so chose to establish a district council which would provide residents with an added voice into local matters. Now, as people know, this district council would be to provide advice only. It did not have the power to set area rates. The financial control for rates would remain with HRM. Mr. Speaker, so it wasn't the intention to put in another, as always been tritely and probably wrongly suggested by certain members, particularly of the media, to add another level of government. What it was trying to do was to put in place a mechanism to give residents who wanted it authority to have a greater input into local matters. Now, Mr. Speaker, these things weren't automatically, and I would suggest that if, as was suggested to me by one of the people this morning, that you were going to create 92 district councils, then there must be something sadly wrong with HRM. If they all felt that they had a gripe that they had to set up a council. So probably if that was the case, then this was a very necessary thing to do. It might provide for that. Now, Mr. Speaker, the legislation also provides for consultation before future amendments are introduced to allow for proper research and reflection on the impact of proposed changes to the Charter. And, of course, the other thing which has created some degree of controversy in the UNSM, as well as in the HRM community. HRM was the creation of the provision of a municipal auditor general. Now, Mr. Speaker, this suggestion of a municipal auditor general, I think personally is a very good one. And we have had some pushback, I guess you'd call it pushback from the UNSM on that, because in addition to having one for HRM, we're suggesting that a municipal auditor general be included in the MGA. And there was an amendment would see that thing would not take place until really there was a meeting of the minds between Service Nova Scotia and the UNSM on this matter. The fact is that in Halifax, spending 40% of the population, a tremendously big budget, that the members from HRM Council, including the mayor, did approach me last year and asked if there was any chance to have an Auditor General for HRM. Now, what the Auditor General would do, the functions would be very similar to that of the Auditor General for the province, is that the Auditor General would not really just look and see whether your accounting practices were correct. You know, municipalities, like everybody else, they have, excuse me, they hire firms of accountants to do that. But this Auditor General would really, in many ways, be doing value for money audits. Is the money being spent wisely? Is the staff being used? They're going to ask all those questions, which sometimes we're happy to answer and sometimes we are uncomfortable in answering. And the thing with the Auditor General, which was requested by the HRM councillors, was that the Auditor General report to council and not to staff. This was a sort of a point of tension, I think, in the current HRM, where there was really the discussion is that if you do, to whom do auditors report? Do they report to the city management or do they report to council? Council would like them to report directly to council. I believe the interpretation is that right now when they bring in auditors, and I could get some help from the member from Preston, is that I understand they have to report to the city management. And this has created, Mr. Speaker, again, you know, government, although sometimes it's very uncomfortable to have the Auditor General review what you're doing, and sometimes you don't agree with what the Auditor General said. It would be very hard as a government to say that a municipal Auditor General or a provincial Auditor General did not perform a valuable function to ensure good governance at the provincial level or good government at the municipal level. And indeed, I'm not sure that I would want to be a municipal unit now that was arguing against the concept of an Auditor General, arguing against the concept of an Auditor General. Now, I do understand that there are financial implications in the MGA for municipalities, and I appreciate that, and that's why government is prepared to work with them to try and come up with a best type solution to the municipal Auditor General. But HRM wants an Auditor General so they can literally, and they're certainly large enough, basically to have a full-time Auditor General to see how they're doing. You know, are the citizens being well governed? Is their money being well and wisely spent? You know, how can things be improved? Are there wastages? Mr. Speaker, these things are topics for Auditor Generals, for Auditors General, and they are good ones. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think I'm close running out of time, and I'm actually just getting warmed up because I had a lot more things that I would like to say, but I do want to make it clear that although government at this time believes that a charter is appropriate for HRM because of its size, its economic base, the fact that it's the site of the provincial government, we do not believe that any other municipality at this time would be well served by a charter. So when people say, well, it's the thin edge of a wedge, which is something, we don't see it that way. And I can make it, I think, probably quite clear, Mr. Speaker, that this government has no intentions of extending charter privileges or introducing charter legislation on behalf of any other municipality at this time. Clearly, right now, this is a standalone piece of legislation. It's intended for HRM. HRM is probably in some ways radically different from the other parts, other municipalities in the province. And there are 55 municipalities in the province, Mr. Speaker. And we think that for the most part, the the MGA works well. However, HRM felt that they had some particular unique circumstances which meant that a charter would serve them better. So we felt, Mr. Speaker, that the introduction of a charter, if it would better meet the needs of HRM and better meet the needs of HRM residents, and and if it meets the needs of HRM residents because of the Halifax being the economic major economic player in the province, as well as the capital and the cultural center and the education center. And I'm talking in the broad sense, not in the individual sense, because we know we've got marvelous. My colleague from King's South-ish today, I believe it was, introduced a resolution on Acadia University being the #1 ranked university in the country, undergraduate university, by Maclean's magazine. We also have, of course, college or Cape Breton University, which is an institution which is maturing and serving the people in Cape Breton municipality primarily very, very well. And we have also St. Francis Xavier University serving the people in Antigonish very well. And not to mention in my home community and that of the Minister of Education, we have the Nova Scotia Agricultural College, and we recently passed an act which is going to enable it to do its better. But the fact is that when you take collectively with the specialized education, the graduate schools, the professional education, the law school, the med school, the architectural school, and engineering school, all of these advanced education things for the most part are here in Halifax. So when we say that Halifax is in many ways the education capital of Nova Scotia, it's not saying that these other institutions don't have excellent quality of education. It's just recognizing the thing. And Mr. Speaker, with those few comments, I would like to adjourn debate on Bill number 179.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for the motion before the House is to adjourn debate on Bill number 179. Is the House ready for the question? The question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Chair recognizes the Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 181, the Halifax Regional Municipality Act?
Thank you. Public bills for second reading. Bill number 181, Halifax Regional Municipality Act. The Chair recognizes the Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, just be patient for 1 second while I. Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and I'm pleased to be able to stand again in my place to talk about Bill number 181, the Halifax Regional Municipality Act. And Mr. Speaker, this is really a companion piece of legislation, to the Halifax Charter Act, and it's I guess really what it is, rather than calling it the Halifax Regional Municipality Act, it is better known as, the more common phrase is the Halifax by Design. And we chose to create a separate act for this, Mr. Speaker, because it deals with provisions which are very different from those which are found in the Municipal Government Act. And it also makes it very easy for everyone to identify the provisions that specifically relate to Halifax by design. And Mr. Speaker, we know that this particular bill is going to generate a lot of public interest. It's going to generate a lot of public interest, and so there'll be a lot of not only debate probably on the floor of this legislature and in law amendments when it hits law amendments, but we are bringing it forth as a separate piece of legislation because we want it to be available to focused discussion. And Mr. Speaker, I guess if we look at it, Halifax by Design has been something that is not new. It's something that HRM has been working on for some number of years now, at least for a couple of years formally. They've been wrestling with this whole issue, particularly of how to build a 21st century capital municipality. Well, we thought that the charter, change that would introduce the charter would be one way to do this. Secondly, HRM, and I did reference this in my comments to the other bill, Mr. Speaker, is that Halifax Regional Municipality is looking for changes to the new charter that will enable development to proceed more quickly downtown, yet will be of high quality and respect the city's heritage. Well, I guess I'd spoken of the heritage earlier, Halifax being founded in 1749. I expected some of these buildings. I don't know how far back some of these buildings do, but clearly there was a tremendous emphasis in Halifax some number of years ago to make heritage, the heritage and the heritage buildings, you know, a major part of of downtown Halifax, and it was seen in some ways as a revitalization of the downtown Halifax. Mr. Speaker, when I first started to come to Halifax as a young person, of course, the two major streets in Halifax were Barrington Street and Gottingen Street. That was the commercial centers of this city. Barrington Street and Gottingen Street, absolutely. Spring Garden Road is, although it had mills, it had a Cameo restaurant, the Garden View restaurant, the commercial development on Spring Garden Road has been, I think, more recent, and one of the things that spurred the development on Spring Garden Road may have been the expansion of the universities and putting all of those people into downtown. So, and of course, too, when Gottingen Street and Barrington Street closed down, or effectively closed down, then if there was to be shopping sort of on the peninsula outside of the shopping centers, it kind of morphed, I guess, to Spring Garden Road. But, you know, there used to be all kinds of theaters in downtown Halifax. Of course, we think of the Capitol, which was the site of the building in which my office is located, the Maritime Center. We had the Paramount. Yeah. Automobiles. No, but I tell you what I can remember in HRM by design, and if you want to get out on Granville Street and Hollow Street and look at it, you dig up underneath that pavement and you will find cobblestones. And I can see the member from Dartmouth South nodding her head. She too can remember that, and I can remember actually...
Whoa, he's really dating the people there.
Mr. Speaker, rabbit tracks. No, the minister. Anyway, so Halifax has really changed, but you know, we had the Vogue Theatre up in Casino Theatre up in Gottingen Street. We had the Gaiety Theatre and I'm trying to remember what the theatre was, and that is now the location of Neptune Theatre. That was a movie theatre when it was converted to Neptune, and it was not the Gaiety, it was the. I'm sorry, I just can't remember it right now. But so Halifax, by design, is something that has been evolving. And you know, from seeing the transformation of the downtown area from Barrington Street and Gottingen Street being the two major shopping areas in Halifax, and both of them, you see boarded up buildings and I was going to say not restaurants, but you see a lot of lounges and other restaurants. It's been a major change. So then they redeveloped the downtown area, you know, the historic properties down there, and somebody, government, and I assume with probably federal and provincial money, a tremendous change in downtown Halifax for the historic properties, and that was seen as something to keep people, the shoppers in the downtown area. And of course, at that time, we were in the shopping center movement. And you know, the first shopping center, I think, in Halifax was the one on Bayers Road, the Bayers Road Shopping Center. And it was followed a little bit later by Penhorn Mall. And then from Penhorn, if I'm not mistaken, it was Micmac Mall, and then it was the Halifax Shopping Centre, and then all of the old little riding communities, a lot of them had mini shopping centers or various malls. And of course what you did was you got in your car and you drove to these things, and the gasoline wasn't approaching $1.35 a liter then either. With Halifax, I remember one of the real thrills for me as a young person was when I used to come and visit in Halifax was when I finally was able to get on the trolley by myself. And they used to have something, they called it the Belt Line. It was 1 and 2, and it ran up Spring Garden Road, and it ran all the way up Coburg, and it went around up Oxford Street, came back across Quinpool, and down there through Cogswell, and came back up Barrington Street, made the loop. They used to call it the Belt Line. And I do remember that because, anyway, it was interesting. And, the thing, and of course, those were in the days where we didn't have diesel buses. At that time, we had the electric buses. And I don't know, maybe we should never have given up the electric buses. And when I first went to university here in Halifax, I stayed at Pine Hill. Was there for a couple of years, and of course, there used to be the number 9 that ran from down in Spring Garden Road up to ran up Tower Road, so we could get off there. So, and I think maybe a transfer. 6 ran down Oakland Road at that time, I think. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track there, and I was just going back a little bit, but. We do know, Mr. Speaker, that there'll probably be considerable public interest in this bill and considerable representation on it before it passes. But to say the whole idea behind it was that the Halifax Regional Municipality has been, they know that if they are going to keep the downtown and develop a commercial center in Halifax, and redevelop the commercial center in Halifax, there had to be changes that would allow or enable the city to respond to development decisions more quickly and efficiently, yet at the same time protect the quality of any development and also respect the heritage of downtown Halifax. So Halifax, by design, was really intended to do those things, to put in place a mechanism which would enable development to occur, to occur more rapidly, yet at the same time retaining quality and respect for heritage. And Mr. Speaker, if a piece of legislation can do that, then I would think, notwithstanding there might be 1 or 2 things that people may wish to see tweaked, that there should be unanimous support for this document in this legislature. Now, I do see one naysayer, Mr. Speaker, but we probably knew that before we introduced it, Mr. Speaker, but it's the amendments will enable the HRM Council to appoint a design review committee to approve architectural design and other characteristics of a new development in downtown. Mr. Speaker, this is not something unique, or will not be something that would be unique to HRM. Committees of this nature, Mr. Speaker, are the norm in other cities, in other major cities. And if we are a major city in HRM, if HRM is going to be a major city, then it has to put in place a mechanism so that it can respond to development needs and other things as a major city. Now, we know that people or organizations and municipal entities like Vancouver and New York, they have these committees and to allow for expert input into the architectural features of structures being proposed. And of course, if anybody doesn't, under the proposed amendments, if anybody doesn't like the decisions of that committee, then they can be appealed to council. Now, right now, as I understand it, is that if you don't like something that is done, you can't appeal to council, then you have to go to the UARB. And, you know, there may be times when appealing to the UARB makes sense, but I've got to believe that, you know, on matters such as this, that there might be a better way to do it. And that's what this legislation is seeking to do, Mr. Speaker, is to give that opportunity and take it away. You know, and it's two things. First of all, it's probably going to be done quicker and more efficiently. People will corral their and make more meaningful appeals. In other words, they'll, you know, they realize that there would be certain timelines. Excuse me, that would go in. They would have to have tight appeals. They just couldn't go in. And secondly, as people in this House would know, the UARB has a tremendous load on it right now. The UARB struggles to keep up with the, load that it's put on it. And if it would lessen the load for the UARB, and you'd still get quality decisions by another body, then it would make sense for all of us. It would make sense for all of us to probably consider that appealing, to a committee of council. To appealing to council might just be a little bit more efficacious than all the time having to go to the UARB. Now, the amendments being introduced today, Mr. Speaker, also clarify provisions relating to bonus and incentive zoning that are already in legislation. And bonus and incentive zoning, and for those of you who are not familiar with that, means that there may be certain restrictions in a zone and exchange for doing something over and above the development that the city may allow some enhancements or some deviation from the current existing line lines. For example, you want to put up a high-rise, some sort of a major office tower, and at the same time, it didn't quite fit the zoning requirements. You say, okay, we might allow that if you go ahead and you fix up the street so that it would be compatible with that. Or at the same time, even put up some affordable housing. There might be some trade-offs where the trade-off would be more positive than the disadvantage that was first apparent. So, Mr. Speaker, there is some provision in the legislation for that. And in return, Mr. Speaker, in consideration for a developer doing more or adding something to a development agreement that would enhance the community, the council might in return reciprocate and say, okay, if you do this, we will perhaps maybe put 2 buildings on the site, or 2 small buildings as opposed to 1 big one, or maybe even add a floor to the building. Again, that would be something that would be determined by council. It's not just, if they want to negotiate this way, then the amendments being introduced are clarifying that particular planning tool. Now, that does currently exist in the legislature, but apparently, I guess that there are some things, seems in it, there is some, not everybody's on the same page about when the meaning of this, so what this does is intend to clarify it. So the amendments being brought forward to clarify the existing provisions are intended to provide an additional planning tool. Now, the changes being introduced to the Halifax Charter Act will result in more certainty for citizens, the development industry, and municipal council. I guess if there's, in addition, the new planning tools will help protect heritage and will allow development to proceed in a timely fashion. The criticism that I've heard as somewhat of an outsider and watching the debates in Halifax with some degree of interest, I guess probably because I'm a little bit interested in that, and secondly, as the minister, is what the developers, they want certainty. You know, they want to know what is possible and what is not possible. So anything, any piece of legislation that will clarify that is good legislation, Mr. Speaker. And we believe that this act will provide some clarity to developers, and it also will provide clarity for those who perhaps don't want development. You know, at least everybody knows what the ground rules are. And apparently right now that is not always the case. And I think of one of the great things, which I think we who don't live in Metro look at with some degree of interest, is what was known as the Twisted Sisters development on the corner of Hollis and Sackville Street. And it is, and it isn't, it isn't, it isn't, it isn't, it isn't. I mean, somebody figure it out for me, and I don't know whether it's on or off now. Last I heard, I thought it was on. Is it on? It is? It is, okay. But, you know, I mean, you know, the ramifications and the back and forth on that particular development were, you know, they just, to me, looking at it from the outside, is, you know, there's got to be some way to fix that. I mean, if you're the city, you shouldn't have to go through it. If you're the developers, you shouldn't have to go through it. You know, somewhere there should be some guidelines that enable this project to move ahead or not move ahead. And apparently that was, clearly it wasn't the case, but that's been 3 or 4 years. That, I think, the old Tech Spark, it may be even down 6 or 7 years ago. Anyway. So the new planning tools, as I say, will help protect heritage and will enable development to proceed in a timely fashion. As I said in my comments on the Charter, HRM's economic growth and development is important to all Nova Scotians, and it is the economic engine of our province. There's no question about that, and we want to make sure that measures that are in place that can be responsive and responsive to Halifax needs in a responsible way. Can be both responsive and responsible, especially around growth, development, and economic opportunities. So, Mr. Speaker, the amendments relating to Halifax design, Halifax by design, are certainly a very important part of that. And I think, and to go back and looking at the controversy over downtown, Mr. Speaker, there is an accompanying amendment to this that came from my colleague, the Minister of Tourism, Cultural and Heritage, that while Halifax and design is being worked on, and we have the new heritage strategy task force out there from his department, that there's a piece of legislation he may wish to see, and he probably will speak to it, what was going to put a 2-year freeze on the development or the destruction of heritage properties. And apparently right now under the legislation is that if you appeal to the council, you want to do something that something is designated as a heritage property, and they tell you no, then you don't do anything for a year, and then you do what you want to. And the amendment which is being proposed by the Minister of Tourism and Culture and Heritage will extend that, put a moratorium on for 2 years, and I think that was that is a good thing until this whole issue of the heritage strategy is straightened out. So, Mr. Speaker, when we're looking at the Halifax Charter legislation and the amendments to the MGA, which are going to be incorporated into the Halifax Charter, and Mr. Speaker, the amendments to the Halifax Charter, which are really HRM by design, then we, I think, probably have to look at all three as a package, because they are intertwined. They are intertwined, Mr. Speaker, and so I think, you know, I encourage that the members of the House to look carefully at these three pieces of legislation. You know, clearly HRM thinks that they are an important piece of legislation. The fact that we as a government did table them, albeit at least the two pieces in the Halifax Charter and the amendments to the Halifax Charter, HRM by design, we felt that they were good pieces of legislation. And indeed, they are going to help promote HRM. They're going to help promote and foster economic growth. They're going to foster cultural growth. They're in Halifax. They're going to foster all kinds of things which would be associated with the capital and the improvements in HRM, probably making HRM a tighter-knit community. That was another thing was considered. I mean, HRM's been in place now for 10 years, but there is still some, not that they were ever trying to do away with community identification, but some people still don't feel that they are in HRM as an identity. And probably it would be better if they did feel, if they, if this legislation would help people not only feel at home and retain their own community identification, to feel that HRM was a good thing for them. It would be better. It would be better. So, Mr. Speaker, we think that these pieces of legislation will do that. And in that interest, we encourage all members of the House to support them. If there are particular items over which or to which they have a difference of opinion, we think that now that these pieces of legislation are tabled, that people are going to have the opportunity to go talk to other people, to get a degree of comfort that these pieces of legislation are good for everybody. The residents of HRM, or if you should happen to live out in East Hants, and say, well, the member for East Hants there, this piece of legislation, is this going to be good for my community? And I think you're going to find that the answer is yes. Now, the danger, of course, sometimes comes that, you may be the member from up in Cumberland North. And is it going to be, is it going to be beneficial to the people up in Cumberland North? Or the other question is it going to do damage to the people in Cumberland North? Which may be a more fundamental question. And we think the answer to that, whether it's Cumberland North, or it's Preston, or it's Cape Breton Centre, or it happens to be even down in Queens. I don't think, we think that this piece of legislation is going to strengthen HRM. These pieces of legislation are going to strengthen HRM, and if they're going to strengthen HRM, they're going to strengthen the communities in Antigonish. They're going to strengthen the communities in Inverness, because, we have to think of Nova Scotia as an entity. And I always kind of think of what's good for one part of Nova Scotia, I think in many ways is good for us all. We have economic development in Halifax, and we know that does spin out across the province. We know that if people come to visit Halifax because of the heritage properties there, that those people who get to Halifax are going to have to drive through Truro. And maybe they'll stop in and see the Agricultural College, or see our tree sculptures, or go see our Veterans Memorial Garden. There are all of these things which they may do. Go and visit the Cultural Centre and the Power Centre. We think if we can get people to Nova Scotia, and they may very well drive down the Eastern Shore and get down to see Sherbrooke Village. If we can get the people here, then we as other communities can get them to other parts of the province. So, Mr. Speaker, these particular amendments, the amendments to the Halifax Charter, HRM by design, which we're speaking of specifically at this time, and what it's intended to do is trying to protect that unique part of the Halifax heritage, which does not exist in my community, but be able to marry that with appropriate development that is going to create greater economic opportunity, greater economic growth, and create more opportunities for our young people. So our young people will stay in Nova Scotia. They don't have to go to these other places right now to get, let's say, well-paying jobs. I don't want to use the word high-paying, but jobs that will enable them to raise their families, will enable them perhaps to educate the kids, enable them to take a vacation. All of these things which we all want, for not only for ourselves, we want it for our kids, and we want it for our neighbors. So this is what Nova Scotia is about. And the legislation, you know, HRM, I think it plays a role in all of this, Mr. Speaker. So these pieces of legislation, you know, are good ones. I think they are beneficial not only for HRM, they're beneficial for our whole province. And I know, Mr. Speaker,